I think like what we'll start off with like this video is a bit of a discussion, a little bit about what happens when we have police or police agencies screw up or they violate rights, right? So because we all know, right, that police, even though they are charged with protecting, and we have these rules in place that govern and set the boundaries for police behavior. We know that police do violate laws and protections all the time. Now, in the case of illegally searching and seizing something, you can sometimes have that evidence admitted in a court of law. And that's useful, but you still have to go through the court system. It still is maybe like kind of intimidating, and it may or may not, always work out. There are also cases then where beyond, like illegal, searches and seizures, right? Even if you're falsely arrested, so if there's like a false arrest situation or you were detained when you shouldn't have been, what ends up happening is usually, not a lot. There are instances where, police are rude to people. They're just kind of like being jerks. Like that's kind of poopy, right? We don't want people to be jerks, all the time, right? So we have these situations where police are rude, and also situations where there is abusive or unconstitutional use of force, where someone is perhaps maybe not seriously injured, but receives some energy. Someone used a baton when they shouldn't have. There are cases where people are severely injured and maimed and disfigured in some way, or death, right? And these are like very serious problems that come up, right? I mean, they form like a real big issue with police practice. And the thing is, right, if we think about, outside of like the harms that are put in place, right, if we think about these harms, it's not just, people have, we have a bad taste in our mouth about police, which many people do. Not everyone, but some people do. It's beyond just that, right? But it also, is the loss of life issue. There's also this issue of where, you violate the rights of people. And while we do want to make sure, the police are equipped in such a way to be able to do their job, right? I mean, there has to be eventually, a limit on their behavior. So what do we do in those situations? Well, historically, there have been a few options, right? So if we think about, like sort of remedies that come into place. So like one is going to be, right, you could just file a complaint. You can go down to the police station, or you can bring it up to the officer and say, hey, this person was being a tool. Like how dare they? I don't really understand how or why they were doing that. Whatever, right? The thing is, right, historically, police agencies really don't have like a good remedy for that, right? Because there are many cases where there's no complaint process at all. So you couldn't even like file one because they weren't taking complaints, right? So they basically tell you to shove it. Or if they did, they made the process, extremely difficult. So, what does that mean, right? So if you had a complaint, right, you couldn't just like say to the officer and it's documented, right? They'd be like, well, you have to go to the downtown station to do it, and they're only available from the hours of 3 to 5 on Tuesdays, or whatever, right? What ends up happening when you limit access like that is that you make it much more difficult to do it, right? Or it's also a bit more intimidating to file a complaint inside the police department rather than doing it, like online or anything like that, right? So, I mean, there is, quite a few difficulties facing you. In some cases, people advocate for a civil board where people in the community review cases, and they make judgments based off of position, and that it can be sometimes effective, but it's only effective as much as power that agency has. There's no power by the agency if there is no way for an agency to allow that civilian review board to do anything, or if there is a lot of policy restrictions that come into place. It is a problem. It's also, you could look into internal affairs, right? IA. They might do an internal investigation, but it becomes really hard because police are, really insular. They look out for their own, and they're really not in the business of, of allowing people to go out underneath them. There's very much a culture where you don't rat out others, because it could be some sort of retribution, whether someone is assaulted, maybe they don't call for backup, whatever. That's also a big thing. There's also a lot of union protections that are in place because, as police, right, you probably deserve to have, union representation. If you are, you have to have guarantees on benefits and salaries and protections and stuff like that. I think that all makes sense. But oftentimes, because they're city employees or they're public employees, they're dependent on budgets. And sometimes governments don't have the money to give people salary increases for a whole host of reasons. So instead, you might find that a union might advocate for different legal procedures in terms of, making it more difficult to fire someone for an officer, or making the investigation process really long, or, putting in a lot of arbitration kind of stuff to make sure that one cannot do that as well. So we face a lot of these problems that pop up, can get all the time, that make it difficult to file complaints. So we'll talk a little bit more